In your breast milk, the DHA level will reflect what you're eating as the mom. Formulas now have, many of them have DHA added, and there's been many studies to understand how high that level should be. And also it's really important in the formulas, like I said, that it has DHA and arachidonic acid. They've actually shown that those together have the best outcomes for brain development rather than just DHA alone.
Where can parents go into the early toddler phase to start to introduce, besides fish, omega-3s and besides supplementation into their children's diet?
For the omega-3s, we're talking about EPA and DHA, which is where the real research is. It's going to be from fish. Fish is the only real option we have. But the fish actually get it from algae in the ocean, and now we have the algae making the DHA and EPA that we can put into supplementation that is completely vegan. So you can get pure DHA and now pure EPA from algae, which is a completely vegan source, alpha-linolenic acid, which is what's in flaxseed and chia seeds, and that is an omega-3, but it is not the same kind of omega-3 as EPA and DHA, and it doesn't have the same level of research behind it. Very pro-ALA, but don't think of that as a substitute for getting EPA and DHA in pure form in.
No, that's where, in the brain you see the highest density of DHA actually in the neuron body, the nerve cell, brain cell body, and in the myelin sheath that's in those connectors between cell to cell, nerve to nerve. So just like an electrical wire where you have the wire covered by that insulation. If you don't have the insulation, then the system shorts out. You don't get a message sent from here to there or there or to there. So that conductivity creates the fluidity in a child's brain developing, in that capacity to grow, to understand, to reflect, to comprehend, all of those things. And that's why the DHA is really the highest fatty acid found in the human brain. It's the most critical. On today's show, we are joined by Dr. Kristina Jackson, a leading expert on omega-3s and their critical role in childhood development. With a PhD in Nutritional Sciences and a career focused on helping parents optimize their children's nutrition, she's here to share how omega-3s can influence cognitive growth, immunity, and overall health.
What a topic, so get ready. Dr. Jackson's made it her mission to make omega-3s accessible and understandable, and today she'll walk us through the practical ways parents can ensure their kids are getting these essential nutrients. Get ready to learn the science behind how omega-3s can transform a child's early development.
Dr. Kristina Jackson, PhD, RD, is the Director of Research for Omega Quant Analytics, LLC, and an assistant professor in the Department of Internal Medicine at the University of South Dakota, Sanford School of Medicine. Kristina received her PhD in Nutritional Sciences from Pennsylvania State University in 2013 and completed her training to become a registered dietitian in 2014. Kristina continues her research in the area of omega-3s and maternal health, helping create the prenatal DHA test and the mother's milk DHA test. She is a member of the Fatty Acid Research Institute, and with this institute, FARI, she has been part of the team receiving 2 small business innovation grants from the National Institute of Health on fatty acid biomarkers. Kristina lives in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, with her partner, 2 kids, and 2 dogs.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
For 7
Thanks
years.
for having me.
I'm a huge fan of yours and your dad's work. We met, actually, your dad and I, this is our first time meeting, but your dad and I back in Beijing, I think 2012, lecturing to a group of Chinese doctors there as well. So you guys are carrying a lot of weight on your shoulders. This is pretty intense, but the work you're doing is amazing. So thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you being here. Before we get into it, Dr. Murray, you have some thoughts on the topic. You're also a leading expert in the field. What are the latest trends in the world of Dr. Murray and pediatrics when it comes to omega-3s?
The latest trend in omega-3s has been the 100-year-old trend, the most critical nutrient for children as they develop. So nothing's changed that. What we do know is much more of the science behind the omega-3s, why they help so much, why they're so important, why they're so critical. So if we look at the human brain, this is where it all starts. We see that the human brain is comprised of about 50% fats and fatty acids. 50% of those fatty acids and oils are DHA. So DHA is the gold medicine, the gold nutrient for the human brain, and especially for a child's developing brain. And especially when we look and we see that over the first 7 years, by 7 years old, the human brain, the child's brain, is 95% of the adult size. So all of this formation, this creation, this platform is constructed in those first 7 years. If there's anything missing in the nutrition, and particularly omega-3s, then something may not be built to its full potential. And then that's the platform that that child lives with for the rest of their life. So, fish oils, we all know that omega-3s, fish are completely the best source. It's in a usable form. The DHA can be absorbed very, very easily, very quickly. Cod liver oil is really the world's original nutritional supplement. Before we had the nutrition industry, we had cod liver oil.
And thankfully, it tastes a lot better these days. So.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But parents knew just empirically 100 years ago, you give your child cod liver oil, they're healthier, their immune system's better, and maybe they're smarter. One of the studies, and I'm sure Dr. Jackson will have many for us as we go through this segment, but one of my favorite studies was this one was Journal of Pediatrics 2003. And they took two groups of mothers, one, pregnant mothers, one group, they gave them corn oil, the other group, cod liver oil throughout their pregnancy. And then they followed their children up until the age of 5 following the birth. What they found was that the group of mothers who took the cod liver oil, the omega-3s with the DHA, their children on average, at the age of 5, 4 IQ points higher than the other group. It just shows if you give what Mother Nature created in the human body the right nutrients, everything will work properly. So,
and every point substantial, by the way, on that index, right? That's not a small leap.
No. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's just to give the frame of how important this conversation is, what Dr. Jackson is going to tell us today. And, the takeaway at the end should be omega-3 is critical, essential.
Throughout our entire lives, but in particular starting with the first 7 years. So let's dive in. Omega-3s during pregnancy. We have so many questions for you, and we hear so much about DHA, as Dr. Murray just accentuated, and its importance during pregnancy. But if you could start there to explain how exactly DHA supports fetal brain development at the cellular level, because that's where we're going to go, and eventually people are going to know at home how to even test for this today. But there are specific stages in pregnancy when it's most critical. What are those? Where does it start?
As with so much, pregnancy has an oversized impact on our health.
Right.
It's actually kind of terrifying how important pregnancy is, because it really does. When I've done my research looking into omega-3s and childhood brain development, the clearest effects usually come from the studies where the mom is supplementing in pregnancy as compared to supplementing the child or infant after they're born. That's when the brain is really critically developing. Obviously, it continues to, like you said. So in pregnancy, some of the most interesting and obvious studies that I have seen that have really gotten me into the pregnancy world have actually been around preterm birth. And so when you think about studying childhood development, it is a really hard thing to study. The outcomes that we look at, there's so many variables that go into the development. And so what's been interesting is preterm birth is kind of an obvious outcome. We can pretty easily measure gestational age. And staying in the womb longer has clear and obvious effects for the entire body system. The brain can be more developed. Everything can be more developed if you can keep the baby in the womb until full term. And so what really popped out to me, I believe it was in 2018, Maria Macreides from the University of Adelaide in Australia. She is an absolute giant in this area. And her and Bob Gibson have run tons of studies on pregnancy and DHA in pregnancy. And they were looking at maternal mental health in some of them, and they're looking at other outcomes. But what kept coming out was that women who were taking fish oil were having lower rates of preterm birth. And then this was also replicated by Susan Carlson at the University of Kansas, Missouri Medical Center. And both of them, looking at DHA, giving DHA to the moms in pregnancy, found that we're getting less rates of particularly early preterm birth, which is much more, affects the brain development of a child much more than a later preterm birth. And so both of them were finding this outcome. And so they both ran additional trials with more women, and both have found that giving women DHA during pregnancy, particularly the key here is women who are low in DHA to start with. So this whole world of research can be a bit confusing, can have some conflicting results. It's not just clear as day as you look through the literature that omega-3s have a huge effect on brain development. But when you start to look at the levels of the mom and where you can interact or you can intervene with higher levels of omega-3 in the pregnancy, you can do so much for that pregnancy to last longer, and then thereby also providing more time for the brain to develop and providing the best nutrients for the brain to develop. And so across multiple studies with multiple outcomes, we've seen this blood level of the mom interacting with the dose that you're giving that makes all the difference in interpreting the results.
Sure. And even some studies show, the increased DHA during pregnancy can help with postpartum depression or the lack of.
Right.
Yep.
Mom will give everything. She will provide DHA from her own stores for the baby.
Yep.
And the placenta particularly will pull DHA across the placenta and arachidonic acid, two really important fatty acids for brain development. And it'll preferentially be pulled in. And there's other research looking at placenta, when a placenta is not operating well, and usually that is related to a metabolic or obesity type of condition. How does that affect the baby's development?
Sure.
Let me ask the burning question moms at home I'm thinking they're asking. Can I eat myself? That is to say, can my diet provide? Can I eat myself or my diet to therapeutic ranges of omega-3? Can I eat enough salmon? And perhaps what are the risks associated with trying to do that?
Yes, that's a great question. So this is another area that I actually gave a TED Talk about this because I thought it was so interesting, this issue of fish in pregnancy. It has been a really scary topic for pregnant women for 20, 30 years. So the findings, it all actually comes back to the same research area, that there's these two strains that came out of the same area of research, and we've been able to, I think maybe we're coming back to a more, focus on the benefits of fish versus just the fear of what could be in fish. So there's a small island in the North Atlantic Ocean called the Faroe Islands, and they have very little available food besides fish. They have tons of fish available, but it's very cold and there's not a lot else to eat. And so I think in the 80s, they started to do research comparing Europeans, I think they were the Danish, comparing them to the moms in the Faroe Islands. And one thing they found was that the moms in the Faroe Islands had longer gestations and larger babies if they ate more fish as compared to the mainland Europeans. So that was interesting. And then they also, from this area, was where the mercury fears started to come. Because these people were eating so much fish, they actually also ate pilot whale. Pilot whale blubber is part of their culture, but not something typical on the mainland Europeans or really most other people. So that blubber, as mercury built up in the oceans from coal burning, so all these are all connected, then they noticed that those women could have high levels of mercury if they were eating high levels of pilot whale, but not necessarily just seafood. So as we know, the longer a fish is in the water, in the ocean, the more little fish they eat, the higher the mercury levels can be. Yep. But that is a pretty extreme case. Almost no one's eating the pilot whale and the amount of fish that those women were eating. So both of these tracks kind of came out, and the mercury one got a lot more traction. The FDA came and was trying to deal with this because it is scary. We don't want to see, there are negative effects of having too much mercury in your system, of course. But of course, everything is about dose. So they put out a warning, essentially, to say, if you are eating fish or if you're catching fish and you don't know the mercury level in that pond or lake, then be careful with that fish. It was mostly actually about non-commercial fish, your own fishing initially. It got bled over into pregnancy, and anything in pregnancy is kind of scary. So it just kind of turned into, fish is really bad for you in pregnancy. So there's evidence that when that warning came out, pregnant women actually decrease their fish intake. There's research showing that women who are eating fish and they find out they're pregnant, they'll stop eating fish. So this is a bad situation. And then in the background, what you're not really hearing about is all of these studies that are showing that women who eat fish have better outcomes, particularly neurodevelopmental outcomes of their offspring.
Okay. So that raises the great question then, for pregnant women or women becoming pregnant, how would you recommend omega-3 supplementation be managed alongside the other essential prenatal nutrients?
I think you I think you take your other prenatals and you take an omega-3. Yeah. And there are different levels. So for us, if you have a good blood level, so if we at Omega Quant we measure the omega-3 index, we also have a prenatal DHA level that is just specifically DHA. And so for us, if you have a DHA level of 5%, which is the percentage of omega-3s in your red blood cells, that's what we measure, that is about equivalent to a 6% omega-3 index, which is a little bit more well known. In those cases, taking kind of a normal amount of supplement, 200 to 500 milligrams of DHA specifically. Daily, taking, if you're going to have EPA as well, which is great, having a, quote, normal fish oil product is also fantastic. Yeah. But if you're below that 5%, the research shows you have to have a higher level of intake. That's a 600 to 1,000 milligrams of DHA, which is not easy to get if you're looking at just prenatal supplementation.
Absolutely. And perhaps we should mention here, too, in terms of the world of fish oils, molecular distillation is one of the methods that's been developed, particularly by the Norwegians, where they can actually 100% remove any contaminants, including mercury, from the fish oils before making them into a supplement.
Right, because it's not just mercury. It's dioxins, furans, PCBs, pharmaceuticals. There's a lot in the waterways, unfortunately. So again, not to be shock and awe, because people should be considering bringing back fish into the diet at safe levels, having a balanced diet. But as Dr. Murray and I like to talk about a lot, is that it's so difficult to eat therapeutic ranges of certain things, especially when the body's demands during pregnancy and into the first 7 years, and even out postnatally. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. But there's studies, there's all kinds of research. I think I saw a quote once. Omega-3s are probably second best studied only to aspirin in the world. There's so much.
Wild.
So where we're looking at meta-analyses, impact of omega-3 saturated fatty acids intake on pregnancy and maternal health and birth outcomes, there is a lot of stuff. Supplementation with omega-3 can prevent preeclampsia, high blood pressure, increase gestational duration, which is often necessary because a lot of preterm births are occurring, increased birth weight, decreased risk of low birth rate, and so forth. But if we could dive into brain development, because the importance is so huge. And I think that's what parents are, because we just talked about it. 4 points IQ increase. That's pretty promising. But what else are we looking to achieve besides, intelligence here?
Oh, right. Absolutely. It's the term brain health is so big because you have kind of the normal cognitive intelligence testing, but then there's also executive function and how well kids can kind of control their behavior enough to do what they want to do and not just, be completely out of control. So there's a whole area of research around that. We've already talked about the anxiety, depression piece. There's a lot. And so if we're talking about DHA in pregnancy, most of the fat is going into the mom in the third trimester, or from the mom to the baby in the third trimester. So starting omega-3 supplementation in the middle of pregnancy is okay. It's great to start off before pregnancy, obviously, but
It's never a bad time to start.
It's never too late. It's kind of unlike the folate issue.
Yeah.
Right.
This is like you can come into it and second trimester start taking supplementation. So starting that then is great. And then so it's starting to, the brain is building then, the fat is getting DHA stores so it can, once the baby's born, it can continue to build the brain. And then what comes after the baby's born is the breast milk provides DHA to the baby. Formula can as well. And having a DHA source during those 2 first years of life, 7 years, but at least 2, it is really, really important. It's kind of part of the design. And so what we've seen is in this area of life, it is harder in the research to get a really clear signal because DHA is very highly correlated with socioeconomic status, and also breastfeeding interacts with the outcomes related to giving DHA in pregnancy and early life to cognitive development. And so a lot of work, again, at the University of Kansas has shown benefits to kids and their ability to focus and their ability to have that executive function piece when they're toddlers. But they do see in the statistics, sometimes they can see that some of that is explained away by the socioeconomic status. And I do think that relationship between DHA levels and socioeconomic status is so interesting because I don't know if that's just a confounding or if there's something about being able to have a developed brain allows you to have, be successful in the ways that get you to those higher SES levels, which is there's evidence around that kind of more of it's an interesting way to think about it. They've looked at just behavior of children. They've also looked at behavior in prisons of adults and giving omega-3s to adults to help them make better decisions.
Less angry, less likely to fight. Sure. Can I make a loose sort of conclusion around this? Correct me if I'm wrong. So, you may be planted within a less than favorable lower socioeconomic status. The postulation is you get yourself to this 6%. We'll explain testing eventually and what that even means at the cellular level. But let's just say you're optimized as a child, infant, maybe even prenatally, to an optimal level of blood circulating omega-3s. That may actually serve as a bridge out of that socioeconomic class through one's ability to be successful in life. Am I drawing too far from?
See, that is kind of where my brain goes. I don't have the evidence to support that. At this point, it makes it really hard to fully show like the DHA is the most powerful thing, but we have to control for that because they are correlated. Higher DHA blood levels, higher SES. We don't really know exactly why. So that is absolutely a speculation, and that could be studied in the future, and or it's spurious and we're not really sure. But there's so many other levels of evidence that would show if your brain is working well, that should hopefully make
life
you
should work well.
Life should work better.
Life goes a little better,
right?
Right, and so we want to give everyone that equal opportunity.
Yeah. Again, it comes back to if you give the human body what it requires to function properly, then it will function as well as it can. And when we're functioning as well as we can, then the opportunities open up to do whatever we wish.
No miracle, right? It's just getting the body to work better on its own. And by the way, we'll stay focused today on the brain, but we're talking about extensions to immune health. We're talking about eye health, skin health. We're talking about so many things. You are very well published. This is one example. I'd love to come back to this postnatal. That's prenatal, we're driven home, but the target levels of DHA in breast milk being some of your more recent research. Can you open up that box for us?
Yes. So this is actually where I kind of got into, this is what I was looking at first, is breast milk and DHA. We have target levels for the omega-3 index. Those are based on health outcomes rather than like population norms. And so for breast milk, we're able to measure breast milk DHA just like we do red cell DHA on a filter paper. So we started to look at the literature, and we found it is about a range of 0.3% of fatty acids as DHA is a sufficient level of DHA for breast milk to provide enough DHA for baby also kind of signals the mom has enough. But 1% DHA in breast milk is actually where kind of Japanese are in the higher fish intake communities, and that's kind of the range we see. A lot of U.S. breast milk samples are in the 0.2% range.
Wow.
They're lower, and so it's a different like range than the omega-3 index. But in looking for outcomes, this is where I ran into a lot of the issues with all the other things that affect childhood development. Making it really hard to tease out how much DHA is there. But we did land on sufficiency of 0.3% and then going up to 1%. That probably is the level where the mom is really able to maintain her own DHA status and give enough to the baby.
So it's that concept where there's a minimum basic level to just avoid problems, but then there could also be an optimal level that actually promotes health and function.
They actually did some research in some. They were tribes that were eating more natural types of like food systems, and that 1% DHA was found to be where I can't remember the name of the word, but it's where the mom enhances the DHA delivery to breast milk, and that was the level where mom was able to also maintain her own, which could have effects on the postpartum depression issues.
Right. Yeah. No, that's great.
Yeah.
Attention, focus, alertness, concentration, cognitive prowess, school scores. I mean, just drive the message home as to how important it is. By the way, we shouldn't make mothers feel guilty if they can't breastfeed.
Correct.
And maybe talk a little bit of some workarounds there. But the importance of it in the first 7 years, maybe even by age and stage of those years, and what this is actually helping children with, starting with breastfeeding. But without making moms guilty if they can't breastfeed. What are the alternatives there? And then maybe extend on, some of the early childhood development, toddler stages.
Yes. So when your breast milk, the DHA level will reflect what you're eating as the mom. So it's very similar to the blood levels. And then formulas now have, many of them have DHA added and there's been many studies to understand how high that level should be. And also it's really important in the formulas, like I said, that it has DHA and arachidonic acid. They've actually shown that those together have the best outcomes for brain development rather than just DHA alone. And so that's a great option. There are drops. You can use DHA drops. In introducing foods, you can drop that into milk or some kind of mushy thing. Smuggle that in. I definitely smuggled it in. And that's a great option. If we're thinking still in the toddler stage, it would be hard in our culture to start introducing fish earlier because we aren't as used to it. In maybe other cultures where fish is very, very common, that might be one of the early foods that they start. There's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely try it, but I understand it's hard to do it when it's not normal in our culture.
Well, let's get into supplementation a little bit later, but for now, what would you recommend? A lot of people have sort of experimented with the vegan side of things. Is that safe? Can they get omega-3s from a vegan diet? Where can parents go into the early toddler phase to start to introduce, besides fish, omega-3s and besides supplementation into their children's diet?
Well, for the omega-3s, we're talking about EPA and DHA, which is where the real research is. It's going to be from fish. Fish is the only real option we have. But the fish actually get it from algae in the ocean. And now we have the algae making the DHA and EPA that we can put into supplementation that is completely vegan, as long as the capsules are. And that's something you can find out. But so you can get pure DHA and now pure EPA from algae, which is a completely vegan source. Most vegans are asking about alpha-linolenic acid, which is what's in flaxseed and chia seeds, and that is an omega-3, but it is not the same kind of omega-3 as EPA and DHA, and it doesn't have the same level of research behind it. So those are all great foods to eat, very pro-ALA, but don't think of that as a substitute for getting EPA and DHA in pure form in. And if you're eating a vegan diet, you're likely needing to supplement several other things as well. So add this as a very important part of the list.
And could you just comment on, like, flaxseed oil is quite well known by a lot of parents, but those plant-based omega-3s and the difficulty of converting that into DHA in a child's body?
Yes. Yeah. So ALA is the essential omega-3 fatty acid. The body cannot make that structure. We don't have the right enzymes for it. But once we have ALA in the body can convert that into other omega-3s. It adds carbons, it adds double bonds, and it can get your EPA or DHA levels. It can change them a little bit. But the degree to which you can change your EPA and DHA levels in your body with ALA versus eating preformed actual EPA and DHA, it's no competition. It's not even close. And if we're talking about, especially if you have a low DHA level, we are talking about taking a pretty high dose of that, that would be equivalent to being a pescatarian. It's very hard to get through the diet.
Right.
So really,
and there are genetic limitations there as well, right? I mean, by the way, this is why we're calling essential, because you can't, you make it.
That's
right?
why
You
can't make it.
That's why they're called essential nutrients.
Right. Downstream, and then of course there's the whole B complex, some trace minerals, magnesium, et cetera, in order to be able to convert those downstream. And I know in your clinical practice, you're seeing a lot of children with ADHD, which of course the DSM is now suggesting is a spectrum. So we're probably all sitting to some degree on it, maybe influenced more and more by the environment. But I wanted to ask your opinion in your clinical practice, the kinds of success you're seeing by implementing such simple measures like taking cod liver oil or the downstream DHA EPA in supplemental form on mothers with children who are concerned about maybe not full diagnostic criteria of ADHD, but my kid's all over the place. They're hyperactive. What are you seeing?
I think there's two sides to that question. One is, in clinical practice, first I look, is there anything obstructing the brain from functioning properly? So we're looking at environmental toxins, burdens, heavy metals, pesticides, chemicals, all of those things. First of all, remove those if we can. And then when you start adding in the omega-3s, the DHA, then you even see better results because you've not got that inflammation in the brain being caused by some intruder from the outside. So if we do both of those things together, then you really see good results.
And I mean, it doesn't have to be diagnostic, clinical, ADHD or otherwise, but in the literature and your review of the literature, we're seeing serious behavioral modifications, improvements in children of the ages 4, 5, 6, school years now, right?
Yeah.
We're seeing teachers are saying, I mean, anecdotally maybe, but there's what did you do with little Tommy? What is the literature saying generally about this?
Several things. So first, we've seen that in the blood levels, we see if there's low omega-3, EPA and DHA, and low arachidonic acid in kids who are autistic or on the spectrum, and there's compared to quote normal divergent. There's neurodivergent and there's the other term, whatever. So there is evidence that having low levels of all of these fatty acids is associated with having autism. And then there also has been work done by Vanderwolf, and she has put together studies looking at kids who are a little older and interventions with them directly and not during pregnancy. And she's found that about an omega-3 index of 6% is kind of the target where you start to see, once you get kids to that 6%, that's usually where you start to see some improvements. Yeah. And that also kind of equated to about 450 milligrams of EPA and DHA a day.
Which makes sense.
Yeah.
Which makes sense. Yeah.
And for kids, it's typically their omega-3 levels are lower than adults. It seems like there's definitely association with age. Yeah. So for the adults, we've tried to target 8%. For kids, 6% is a good first level target.
That's great. And could you talk about the actual testing method that you developed?
Yeah. And so this has been we do a filter paper blood spot test, which is becoming very common these days. This has been done with fatty acid research for decades. So this is nothing new to the research community. And so we at OmegaQuant have... we do a finger stick test, so you can get it at home, get a little kit.
Meaning you can do it yourself.
You can do it to yourself. Yeah. It's a lancet. If you are a child, you might want to, as far as our lancets go, they're a little bit bigger. So if you're a kid, you might want to get a smaller lancet so it doesn't hurt as much. But
from your local CVS?
From a CVS or from Amazon. And then you just prick your finger. You do a blood spot onto the filter paper, send it into our lab, and we work in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and we analyze the fatty acids that are in that blood spot. And with the omega-3s, we're able to see a very, very clear signal with the level in the blood spot and then also intake. So it's really great.
So to sort of bring this down to the cellular level, if folks at home can imagine looking under a microscope at bunch of red blood cells and then zoom in even further, you're looking at the membrane, right, of the red blood cell, and you want to see that membrane has at least 6% formation. If we're talking about the formation of the membrane, 6% of that should be omega-3 fatty acids, EPA and DHA. What does that mean? I mean, what does it mean for how the cells are working, how that's going to translate to the health and benefit of the child?
Yes. Such a great question. So the blood has plasma and it has red cells. Half of the blood is red cells and half is plasma, but almost everything you measure at the doctor is in plasma. Looking at red cells is actually kind of boring to most people. So we actually like looking at the red cells. It is, they carry oxygen all over the body, super important. But they're really just tiny little cells that have almost nothing but the phospholipid membrane. And so that lipid membrane, those are where the fatty acids are. They create the kind of the wall of the cell to the membrane of the cell. And they're all different kinds of fatty acids. They're saturated, monounsaturated, poly. They're all different kinds. And so we measure all of them. We measure 24 different kinds of fatty acids. And like you said, we can see the percent of them that are EPA and DHA or total omega-3. And we're able to, those types of fatty acids are interesting because they have an interesting shape. They make space in the cell. We think there's a level of flexibility it gives the cell, but it certainly helps, and fluidity. So it helps, the body makes that, picks out the right types of fatty acids to make those membranes so the red cell can function. And so it's more like a tissue level. We've seen when in rat studies, we don't do this in people as much, but the level of omega-3s in the red cell is reflective of the level in heart tissue, muscle tissue, pretty much all tissues except for the brain. Unfortunately, the brain is much, much richer than red cells in omega-3s. So that does not correlate as well, but you still, if you have more omega-3 in your red cells, it's going to be in your tissues, and that's where it's going to have its effect. Sure. And then if we went into the inflammation topic, that's where omega-3s are actually pulled from the membrane in an inflammatory event to create all these molecules that affect how the body responds to inflammation.
Medical buzz term of the day for a really good reason. That's a whole other episode for which you'll end up coming back and telling us about. It's really easy for folks to interpret, though, right? I mean, this is an example of your report. And you mentioned this earlier, this percentage number here, and this being 6.10 as per example. And then even to your point, Dr. Murray, where you're talking about, okay, here's just enough, to get by and get the body. But optimal levels, let's have that conversation, how we're looking at this index here and also what optimal percentage we should all be striving for.
Yes. So the omega-3 index was originally created around cardiovascular health in adults. And they found that an 8% omega-3 index is those are the people who have the fewest amount of heart attacks and sudden cardiac events.
Of which, by the way, 50% are silent. Right? And not measurable, predictable, at least through symptoms or even cholesterol levels. So when you know you have an 80%, and this is, by the way, stuff I learned from your dad.
Oh, yeah. This is
through
his
your
baby.
research, getting up to that 8% or higher, and, this is for the adult cohort perhaps, but you're actually reducing your chances of heart attack, silent and otherwise, by 80%, maybe some of the literature supports. It's amazing.
Yes. So that's the original audience for this test, and less than 4% was really, that was the lowest group, highest risk. And when we started to look at, the pregnancy area, kids, those are different areas. So we were trying to look at a completely different set of research, and we found that, and others have found that for kids, kind of shooting for 6%, because kids tend to start at like 2%. We rarely see an adult at 2%, but kids could be lower. So don't be worried about that, I would say. But looking to try to get to 6%, being at 8% would be fantastic for kids. We don't see any issues with that. And I will say, I believe it was the government in Norway was trying to find the upper limit of intake for children for omega-3s, and they weren't able to find enough evidence to even set an upper limit. Yeah. It doesn't mean you just bathed in omega-3s all the time, but it does mean it's a very safe thing to have and to give to your kids as well.
And based on, if a parent does this test, sees what their child or their own number is, how often would you recommend retesting after supplementing to start seeing results?
Yes, the best thing to do would be to take a test before you start supplementing to see
where your baseline
level is, and it does affect how much are you getting from your diet already. Are you eating fish? Then you'll have some in your body. We would recommend retesting after 3 to 4 months. That's about the life cycle of a red cell, of the red cells in your body, and it helps. You're kind of maybe at the steady state for the supplementation or intake dose that you're at there. And then you can, if it's not as high as you want, then you can look at increasing your dose. But there are other things that do affect your absorption. So your product, the supplement you're using, could have a form of omega-3s that you're not absorbing well. If you don't take it with a meal, if some people can take it without a meal and absorb it fine. Some people need that extra ability to absorb fat to really get everything out of the supplements, or the form of the supplement could really matter.
I actually want to talk about that because of the science behind this guy in a second here. Confirmed research actually using your test model. So we'll talk about that in a moment. But just to go back for parents for a second, the testing that you offer for the mother's milk, I mean, that's the one we're seeing here on the screen on the left here. So the child is, breastfeeding, and you don't want to lancet them. And you also want to know, and again, you're not necessarily going to be supplementing them, and maybe they're low because you can't introduce fish at an early age. This is a perfect option to be able to test your mother's milk. And then, of course, it's on to mom now, right? What does she do to intervene? So this is another baseline bookmark. Intervention and then retesting. What if a mom finds herself low? Well, both of you, I'd love to hear from you. What are you telling moms to do?
500 milligrams, start with 500 milligrams DHA, molecular distilled, so there's no impurities, no mercury, no pesticides, anything else. Start taking 500 milligrams every morning after breakfast. And then 3 months, retest.
And what's great about the milk, mother's milk, is that it changes much faster than the red cell. So they could test in a couple weeks, really. What's also nice is you don't have to prick yourself. It's just taking a sample from a bottle or from yourself. Because we're doing a percent composition, the amount of fat in the breast milk, which changes dramatically throughout a feed and throughout the day, that doesn't affect the number that we're getting. So it's very robust in that way. And you're able to, if you did, you don't breastfeed for that long, so waiting 3 months might be too long. But you could test within a month, and then see where you're at. And this is more like plasma compared to the red cell, where what you absorb it's amazing. We've done some research, and whatever mom is taking in with DHA, especially if she doesn't have a very good level herself, it's going right to breast milk. It is just showing how important it is.
Nature's priority.
To the baby, yes. It's wild.
And then there's this other wonderful test. I love you guys have developed these, the prenatal DHA. So, we've got the breast milk. We can test for that, and we can intervene. We've got a child now who's a couple of years old, maybe just before they're weaning off and they're starting to introduce diet. We can test their blood. But this intermediate marker, now the child's in utero, we can test mom's blood. Why? Not just for mom, but also because this is the blood that's serving the infant or the unborn infant, the unborn child, which is amazing. So I said I'd bring this up, and you got to comment on this, Dr. Murray. What you guys have developed, the entire Child Life line is amazing, but explain what this is. I mean, this is new stuff. It's a new
Sure.
delivery system.
Yeah.
It's a payload beyond others. It's tasty, chewy. What have you done here?
So historically, like I mentioned before, cod liver oil was the gold standard for receiving DHA for adults, for children. Problem was, historically, it never tasted that good. Yeah. Now it does because of this, purification methods and just the freshness. We can make it taste good. Apart from that method, which is still my recommendation, usually start there with cod liver oil. Then we develop these, soft chews, the omega-3s and those, where they're in a matrix, which is basically a biological matrix similar to the human body. So a child or an adult eats those omega-3s in that form, and they're instantly absorbed. So you're getting up to 100% absorption just because of the matrix that they're in. So again, that can help with people who don't absorb as well as others. It takes that out of the equation. But my recommendation always is whatever form you can administer the omega-3s or the DHA, just
get it in.
Agreed.
But there is literature on the support of this delivery system in a 90-day trial. It's actually been repeated, and the improvement, upregulation of the percent index using Omega Quant technology, actually, by the way, significant improvements after those.
No, because it takes that part of the equation out where the absorption is guaranteed.
Right.
Yeah.
Can I also say I see that has choline in it?
Yep.
Which is
Yeah, please comment.
fantastic.
Yeah.
We were involved in the study that was focused more on choline, but we found that
The combination.
higher levels of choline actually augmented the omega-3s in the blood, even without a higher omega-3 dose, which we've never seen another nutrient do before. And this was specific to pregnancy. It has to do with the mother making so much more. Their blood is expanding so much. So I'm not sure how it happens if that works outside of pregnancy. But in pregnancy, the choline and the DHA are really important together, and choline is not in a lot of prenatal supplements.
Exactly.
So super important to get.
Well, you mentioned earlier, this, I think you alluded to the idea of the malleability, or let's call it the flow state of the red blood cell. I mean, if we translate that, imagine looking into the brain and we blow up this, nerve cell. Nerve cells don't really connect with each other. There's spaces between. But in order for them to signal and communicate and divide and have neuroplasticity, a fancy term for, just how the brain is constant change, right? Learning, behavior, mood, et cetera. That flow state, if you will, or the malleability or the cell integrity, the membrane, having that higher percentage of the omega-3, which is testable, as we've been talking about, is going to improve nerve cell to nerve cell communication. And so that's why it extends to IQ, improved mood and behavior, maybe even punching out of certain SESs, right? Socioeconomic statuses. I mean, this is really, again, no miracle medicine, just getting the body to do what it does better on its own, but it is quite miraculous.
No, that's where, in the brain you see the highest density of DHA actually in the neuron body, the nerve cell, brain cell body. And in the myelin sheath, that's in those connectors between cell to cell, nerve to nerve. So just like an electrical wire where you have the wire covered by that insulation. If you don't have the insulation, then the system shorts out. You don't get a message sent from here to there or there or to there.
Right.
So that conductivity creates the fluidity in a child's brain developing, in that capacity to grow, to understand, to reflect, to comprehend, all of those things. And that's why the DHA is really the highest fatty acid found in the human brain. It's the most critical, which we come back to at the beginning.
Yeah.
You game for answering some questions from our listeners and social media?
Yeah, I'd
Does
love
that
to.
sound good? Okay. So we have one from Sarah on YouTube, and she's asked, my son absolutely hates the taste of fish, refuses to take omega-3 supplements. I guess they're picky. Any tips for sneaking in omega-3s into their diet, perhaps? Things that you've, or the literature suggests, are successful in getting these picky eaters to get their 6% or higher.
Yeah. Picky eaters are tricky. You probably have a lot more experience with that than I do. But like you said, hiding it in the food as much as you can. So the drops into milk, if they like cereal, that's usually kind of an easy one. Some eggs, if they like eggs, can be enriched in DHA. It's hard to find out exactly how much is in there. So that's not a really rich source. But if you can start kind of stacking these smaller sources, it's definitely better than nothing. There's more gummies. There's powders coming out. My kids we call it Omega juice, but it's like a smoothie emulsion. It tastes really good. It's got a big bang for its buck. And it's got all kinds of flavors. So everything's trial and error. And once one thing works, the kid changes. But
once they're at the age of
But you
supplementation,
try.
you do your best day to day, right? But have you ever had a kid say no to that one? Have you ever had a kid say that chew emulsion tech flavor and everything else? By the way, there's no sugar in this either, right?
Zero sugar.
Oh wow, yeah.
But really, the beauty of there's the pro and con of those, of an infant and a child growing up. But what I always tell a parent is like those first 2 to 3 years is actually when you have the most compliant subject under your control. Right. After that, things start to change, So really at those first year, second year, third year, you can find ways to smuggle things in. That's your job as a parent.
Yes.
And kids, they learn by exposure, and you model, right? So if you're taking your spoonful of your omega-3 liquid in front of them, I think more and more they're more likely to sort of fall in suit, perhaps, at least at the supplemental side. But as we've been talking about, it starts early days, in utero. So it's on moms to be thinking about themselves, their own health, and what they're conferring benefit to their unborn child as well. We've got a bunch of other questions.
Sure. This one is from a mom from Instagram. I've heard that plant-based omega-3s from flax seeds aren't as effective as fish-based ones. Should I be focusing on fish oil for my child's brain development, or a plant source is good enough? So this kind of goes back to what we talked about, but maybe you can...
Yeah, I'll hone in a little more. Just like what we talked about, ALA is what's in the plant sources that you're talking about, flax, chia, and then EPA and DHA are the marine-derived ones, and they are of the same family, but very different. The body can convert ALA to EPA and DHA, but it's a pretty slow process, and we can get much higher doses and much higher blood levels when we eat fish regularly, when we take a supplement that has EPA and DHA. So still have the ALA, that's great, very good. Also include some of the EPA and DHA wherever you can.
Great answer.
I think the analogy, at least that I use with my own patients sometimes, good or bad, I don't know. But if you're looking for a carbohydrate source, walking into a wheat field and try to munch away on that, you may get that carbohydrate source the body desires. Not that I'm endorsing wheat here, but nonetheless, that's an analogy. But to have a milled flour, and even at that stage, not so optimal. But the analogy to DHA EPA would be to actually have a slice of bread, right? And that would be, that's your carbohydrate source. Downstream, the body can use it. David on Facebook is asking, are there any signs or symptoms that indicate my child might be low on omega-3s? How can I tell if they're getting enough, or should I consider testing? Well, you know what, David? Hopefully you were watching. But once again, reiterate how easy this is, where they can order, and the process.
I don't know of any really clear, specific signs and symptoms of low EPA and DHA besides a low essential fatty acids, which could be a skin issue. Like if you have skin issues, that's kind of a general low essential fatty acid deficiency symptom.
And when you say skin issues, sorry, but what do you mean?
Like flaky dermatitis type stuff.
Eczema.
Yes, yeah. But specific to EPA and DHA, not so much. So testing is really helpful because you can get an objective view of where they are on the spectrum. Being below 4% for adults, probably below 3 or 2% for kids would be considered pretty low. And then bringing that up with diet over the course of months is you should be able to start to see the blood levels go up, and hopefully over that time start to see your there is some effect of feeling better potentially, especially being that low. It can show up in a lot of different ways, but being able to track your blood levels and potentially symptoms is helpful.
It takes all the guesswork out. I mean, it really does, right? Then you're getting this right amount. The child's getting what they need to develop properly.
Omegaquant.com, very affordable. Just keep in mind, if people are budgeting out there, it's got to be bookended. You're going to test, you're going to do something about it, and you're going to be retesting. And I love that David's asking, because dads are, getting involved in now some of the adjacent care to the family.
So here's one from another mom on Twitter. So my daughter's allergic to seafood, and I'm worried about giving her fish-based omega-3 supplements. What are some safe, allergy-friendly options for ensuring she gets enough omega-3s? So, mention.
So there's always, like we talked about, there is the algal option, and that is completely doesn't include fish at all.
Yep.
So that's EPA and DHA. That's probably your safest bet.
Yep.
But I do believe that even fish oil capsules, they've been distilled. They're all fat. I believe the allergies are more around the proteins, but But that is definitely something you want to work with your doctor on.
It's a tricky one. I generally recommend if a parent, any concern that her child has any sort of seafood allergy, just don't test, don't push it. Just go to the allergy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great
there are great examples of algae-based supplements that are showing as good success. I mean, really, that's what it's at. These distillation processes. There's a big, manufacturers kind of look like a beer manufacturer. They're just basically algae that's pumping out. You give it some sugar and it pumps out some omega-3s.
Yeah. It's amazing.
What an hour that just flew by. So much more to dive into, obviously. Before we tell people where they can go to find out more about you, any final thoughts?
Sure. I would go back to the very beginning where, if we're looking at the essential nutrients that a child depends upon to grow and develop properly in every way, brain, immune system, body-wise, organ-wise. We have the essential vitamins, everybody knows about those. We have the essential minerals, but really at the top of the list, we should keep the omega-3 fatty acids, particularly the EPA, DHA, and particularly the DHA. Because any deficiency, any low level of that is going to influence the growth, development, maturity of the brain in every child to some degree. We cannot always measure how much, but we know chances are it will. So DHA, just make sure that, if you can, take it throughout pregnancy. Introduce it to your child as soon as they start eating solid foods or when you finish breastfeeding. And you're doing the best thing. You're giving your child an insurance policy.
Huge. Where's research leading you next?
The research it's kind of the implementation research now that we're in. So a paper was published by Susan Carlson and Dr. Seaton, I think is how you say her name. And it's a recommendation guideline from the Academy or the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecologists. And that's the big thing. So really getting the testing so that we can identify women with low levels of omega-3s and getting that and also being able to treat them with a high dose that they might not be able to get at their own grocery store. That is the level to get that throughout the the establishment medical community is really, really key to affecting a lot of people. Yep. It's very safe. And so them getting a medical practice guideline is a huge step in that direction. And then it's working with all the logistics of that. But we're really hoping it's a simple intervention. And when it comes to the main focus is preterm birth, but it's going to have the knock-on effect of better brains. So we're really excited about that.
Very cool.
Great work. So really we should start thinking folic acid, omega-3s, they're in the same boat.
Agree completely.
Preconception.
Absolutely.
Throughout pregnancy. Yeah.
Great summary. Well, thank you so much for joining us. People can find out more about the testing at omegaquant.com. You're offering courses, which I love. I just wanted to mention as well, the Omega Quant University. People can come here to learn more about all of the research you guys are doing. You and Dr. Bill Harris, your dad, and to get tested and what these interpretations mean. They can find you on Facebook at Omega-3 Index, on Instagram at Omega Quant, and Twitter at Omega Quant. Thank you for joining us in the first 7 years. And folks, don't forget to subscribe, share the episode. This is one of our best and it's one of our most important. Any parents, caregivers in your life, if you yourself aren't one, and together we can help raise a happier, healthier generation. So until next time, stay well and stay connected. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.